I'm going to now start talking a little bit about what happens inside the institution, the educational institution. So next slide, please. So here you see from our study, the first table on the top shows the breakup of time of the students. So in our 7,000 student interviews, and by the way, there was not much difference in the breakup of time by the tier of the institution. So whether it was an IIT or a good private college or a good government college or a medium or a bad one, it was pretty much the same. About 58% of the students' time goes listening to lectures, 10% is observing experiments, 9% is doing one's own experiments, 3% is group projects, journal writing, which is like a very key component of learning, which is where you stop the class and say, all right, now to assess what you've learned, just write a few bullet points and then we'll discuss it. So that's called journal writing. And then assessment or tests, exams and so on. You see the big difference with the United States where the lecture component is significantly lower, 58 versus 15. And that difference is made up with the group projects, 3 versus 40. Okay, so this is pretty significant. And then we videotape classes in all these countries, and I was quite surprised that no matter which of the institutions I videotape classes, we're taping the same course, a basic circuit theory course, across many institutions in India. I personally videotaped several, including IIT Madras and others. The finding was interesting that not a single student asked one question, right through all these things. The 1 hour class, where there's 20 students in the class, which was typical of the IITs, or 70 students in a class, which was typical of the private engineering colleges, nobody asked a single question. Now that might be a little unfair in terms of its implication, because students might be learning in a different way in India, outside the classroom through networks, but it certainly recognizes that what they're learning in the class, nothing. You know, they do not take the teacher seriously at all. Okay. And I'm talking in a university, and I apologize in advance to all of us who are educated. But this is a reality of the quality of education. What we saw in our study is the infrastructure is very good, the students are well prepared when they come into the institution to learn, but they don't get a good education. Now this means something is going wrong. It's not that the teacher is teaching rocket science and is unable in terms of content, but too much time is spent on explaining concepts. If 58% of your time is spent in listening to a lecture, you're learning concepts at the level of broadcasting, and you're not getting a chance to apply the concepts and therefore thoroughly understand them. You're not understanding how to work in group projects or in teams. I did a conference 2 years ago at Stanford where I invited companies to talk about whether they would recruit engineers from India, China or the United States. So these were 20 companies, both large and small, big successfuls as well as medium and small ones, Intel, Cisco at the top, for example. And they all said to a man or woman, to a person, none of them would hire a fresh engineer from India. They said after 2 years of experience, they much improved. Whether that experience is in the United States or India, it was fine. And that was sort of the optimal point at which one should hire them. And then they were still able to be taught concepts like teamwork, not to work in hierarchies and so on. And then they said, but after 5 years of working in India, again they become unhireable, because then they're too set in their ways. Whereas an American engineer, they would hire right away. And it wasn't technical skills. Company after company said technical skills, they have it in terms of understanding concepts. There's no difference. And mind you, they're looking at the best, all right? In Silicon Valley, you're looking at the best that have gone from India, and they're comparing those with the American-born and Chinese-born engineers that they recruit. And still this problem came up. So the problem is much deeper on the average in India. Now you see in that table below, for IIT Madras and Stanford University, what are the number of hours worked by the student? And this I think is pretty interesting as well. So if you look at number of class hours, IIT Madras 30 hours, Stanford University much different. In fact, it favors IIT Madras. If you look at self-directed work that you do on your own or in groups, it's 13 versus 40 hours a week. So in 1 week, the average IIT student is working 43 hours. The average Stanford student is putting in 65 hours. You would expect some return to that extra work, right? You're putting in 1.5 to 2 years extra. In Goa, I was discussing this with my IIM friends, 80 or 90% of whom are IIT graduates. And things have obviously changed. Those days you had a different kind of entrance requirement. It wasn't that rote-based test. People come into college and they're completely burned out. And this is what the head of computer science at IIT Madras told me. He said, I get students who've spend years working very hard getting into IIT Madras. And then they say, fine, we made it now, let's rest for at least 1 year. And I must confess, I got a terrible education at IIM Calcutta and was completely unfit for anything in the marketplace. I ended up spending those 2 years playing bridge, so I can't complain. So next slide, please. So just a bit of perspective, when I say that the quality of education is poor and the teachers don't know how to teach, I think there are deeper problems here. And here I'd like to sort of talk a bit about the politicization of the university system, which is so deep and has created immense problems. So just in terms of historical perspective, it has to do something with history. In the Prime Minister Nehru's era, there was a fairly high rate of growth of higher education institutions, HEIs, 26.1% per year. This was because the British had effectively decided that, there's a very nice quote from a British administrator saying that, why do we want to create these institutions that will create our own detractors, grumblers, and critics? If the Indians want to teach them, let them teach. We will just give the exams and award the degrees and so on. So that was the British approach, and it led us in 1947 to a situation that was interesting in a way, that the University of London model of the university as an affiliating but not a teaching body had come to be established. But all the education was done in what were largely private colleges. And then after independence, most of those colleges were taken over by the state and they became aided private, and the state promoted colleges. And so you had a fairly rapid rate of growth. Nehru observed, however, that these colleges were not delivering quality. They were essentially geared towards small businesses or of course, he had a different vision of public sector enterprises in large industries, and so he created the IITs, the RECs of the time as joint ventures. He let the university system be on its own, and that in effect was a political decision. They could fulfill their political mandate of access, which was their big pressing need at the time, and all the funding went to these premium institutions. So you got quality but at a very high cost. It was clearly unsustainable. Mrs. Gandhi comes in and she basically shuts down the system, says there's too much politicization, I don't want growth, and we will change the concept of equity from enabling the underprivileged to learn anything to creating courses that everyone should learn, such as agriculture, rural development and so on. Vocational training. So there's a different model of growth, but by clamping down, the rate of growth fell to 10%. And then you've had since then sort of a rising rate of growth, largely driven by the decentralization of politics to the states. So the national government got out of the business and said, okay, states, you pretty much do what you want. So now they're trying to get back in the game, and talk a little bit about that. There's immense growth you see, which has been over 30% in the last 5 years, and averages 23.5% since 1985, is driven by that. So